Okay, guys, welcome back to Let's Get Freaky podcast. Super honored for my guest tonight. We've got an awesome show for you tonight. We welcome Brian Lacy to the show. How are you, brother? Welcome to Let's Get Freaky podcast.
I'm doing great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show with you.
Ah, it's an honor, man. Thank you very much. You are a
Thank you.
writer, a music producer, alien contactee. There's a lot of stuff there, man. I'd love to go to the start of your story, where it all began for you. You're based in Texas, is that right?
Yes, sir. Texas.
Awesome, awesome, man. Beautiful part of the world.
It is a lot, especially Nacogdoches is m- piney woods. In fact, a lot of people from Germany years and years ago settled around in East Texas because it reminded them of the Black Forest. Of course, a lot of the forest has been cut down since then, but it's still a beautiful place.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and it's so big. I think sometimes here in the UK, people don't realise like how. I think it's like five times the size of the UK, just Texas. Five or four times the
If
size.
if you tap to drive, try to drive from where I am down at the bottom up to the Panhandle, it's like 7 hours.
Wow. Yeah.
You try to drive across, it's about 5 hours.
Yeah. It's big, man. It's very big. So where does your journey into the paranormal begin? Where does it all start for you?
Well, I would say it started in 1956. Now there may have been things that happened before then, but I wasn't aware of them at all because I was too young. I was 6 in 1956. We had moved from El Paso to Seagoville because my father had gotten a transfer from the federal prison in El Paso, or Anthony actually, to Seagoville because it put him about 3 or 4 hours from his mother and his father because they were getting up in age. And one night I went to bed and I had the same routine every night. Mom would walk me into the bedroom, would tuck me in, pull the covers up on me, which I'd have to kick off after she left because it'd be too hot, and tell me good night. And she'd usually ask me if I wanted the hall light on, and I would say yes. So she would leave the door slightly open and the hall light on. And then I would fall asleep listening to muffled sound of the television in the living room and then watching TV. Well, that went on for a long time. And we had moved to Seagoville in after March, or I believe we were moving in March. So we had April and May, and then June, July, August, September before school started. September is when school started. And they didn't put me into school when I just got there because I hadn't been 6 years old at the right time for that. Um, she put me into bed. She turned around and left, leaving the hall light on. And I turned around, and there at the end of my bed were these three little guys. They were about they were about 4 feet tall. Now, the bed was an old bed from the early 1900s with iron bedposts, and it was taller than beds are now. So I saw them from about here up, and I'd never seen anything like them in my life. Plus, I couldn't figure out why they were in my room. They weren't supposed to be in my room. So I screamed for my mother, and she came in there, and they were gone. So she tucked me in again. So you need to get to sleep because you need to sleep tonight. She didn't say you were having a bad dream. She didn't say this is just your imagination. She didn't mention them at all. She just tucked me in, put me in bed, and I said, yeah, leave the light on, and she left. Well, the next night, the exact same thing happened. Now, I believe I've got a slight mistake in my book because I said the next night it was different, but it could have been. They do like the number three. Anyway, it was either the next night or the night after that. She brought me in, put me in bed, said goodnight, and left. And I screamed again. And this was the third time I had yelled for her, whether it was the second day or the third day. So I screamed for her and she came in there, and of course they were gone. And she laid me down, tucked me in, and she sat down on the edge of the bed and she said, "Son, if they come here again, don't call me, because when I get here, they'll be gone. You're just going to have to learn to deal with them yourself." Now, she didn't tell me what them are, and obviously she knew, but I did, I was 6. I wasn't thinking that way. I didn't realize what was going on, except that I did feel a little bit abandoned, but I thought, okay. And so she got up, asked if I wanted the hall light on, and I said yes. And she left the room, and I turned back around because I watched her leave. I turned back around, and there they were at the foot of my bed again. This time there wasn't, it was right after she'd left. They were back. And over in the corner of the room, and I believe it was to my left, was a guy that was about 6 or 7 feet tall. And he looked like Captain Hook. He looked like he had a pirate's cap on, stereotypical, and a frock coat, only I couldn't see his legs. I couldn't see his arms really good. It was like the coat sort of faded out and away. Now, Captain Hook was my very favorite, or one of my favorite cartoon characters. I had the book Peter Pan, and I looked at it often, and I liked Captain Hook, even though he was a little bit evil, because he did provide comic relief. So then the room started getting bigger, and actually I found myself laying down, and the room was getting bigger, and I couldn't move. And Captain Hook seemed to be dancing around in some weird, what I thought must be a pirate dance. And I could move my head a little bit and see him, plus it wasn't a really big room. And but I felt like I was tied up, even though I wasn't. So my body was paralyzed, and which is pretty easy for them to do. And the bed felt like it was rotating as the room got bigger. So I felt later after I realized everything that was going on, had gone over this stuff in 2009, I wasn't even in the room at that point. I was either in transit to the ship, which was probably right outside, or whatever, because there's no way to make the room bigger. And the bed seemed to be rotating in the middle of the room, which in a way was taking away a lot of my attention because I was concentrating on that. I thought it was strange. And the guys stayed at the foot of the bed like they were hooked to it. They were moving with it. And 2 of them seemed like grays, but not the real mean looking ones, but the big eyes. And one of them, he kept changing into a rag doll. In the 50s, we had rag dolls that we played with, Raggedy Ann, and then some people had homemade rag dolls, but I had seen Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy, and I'd seen some made out of burlap, and he looked sort of like that. And his eyes were sewn on and his mouth was sewn on, but then he kept changing back, and it was like he was trying to mess with my perceptions, but he wasn't doing a good job of it. So that went on for just a little while. And right before I started to get freaked out, they were gone. The room was back to the right shape. The bed was in the right place. It wasn't moving, and I could move my hands and stuff. And now I've never talked about this because I didn't want to confuse people when I started my interviews and things. My head was through the bars of the bed, and I'm going, what what happened? How did this happen? And I was on my side, and I really had a conflict as to whether this was a dream or not. But then I go, well, mom was just in here and they were just in here and then they disappeared. And then I realized I could lay down on my bed and pull my head out of the bars. I wasn't really entrapped. So, um, but that confused me for a while. And I thought about that quite a bit more than just them showing up. And because I kept wanting to think it was a dream, but I knew I hadn't gone to sleep. It has always taken me a long time to go to sleep. In fact, I've learned not too long ago that if I breathe really deep and like I'm asleep, deep in and deep out and deep in and try to not think, I'll fall asleep or I'll wake up from a dream. So anyway, I didn't call mom because she told me not to. And that was the experience. And I did not want to see them again. Now, they didn't scare me. I didn't cry. I screamed for her because she was in the living room. It's not like I was screaming, you know, like in the movies. And I knew I had to just deal with it myself. And her saying that to me made me know that it really happened. But it was weird the way I had this conflict. It's like they put it in my head to make me think they weren't there. But they didn't do a very full-fledged job. And I decided I didn't want to see them again. So I covered my head up with either my blanket or a pillow. I eventually switched it to a pillow. I believe it was the blanket at first. And I said, well, man, well, I didn't say man. I said, I'm just going to cover my head up. That way, if they come here, I won't know. And so then that was it. That was the first experience.
Wow. Wow, man. So did you think that that one that was changing, it was changing to like the ragdoll and raggedy doll, and then it was going back? What did that look like as it was transforming back to its original state? Can you remember what that one looked like?
Mostly it would be his eyes would droop or change and then go back to normal and then look like they were stitched in. And then it was like sort of like fading in and out in a movie. I
Hmm.
think I could make a movie of it, that kind of thing. So he would just change. But every once in a while, one of his eyes, the whole thing would just sort of move down on his face, and then all of a sudden his whole full face would be different.
Hmm. Wow. And they were like the three greys. They look like greys, them entities.
Yes.
Wow. And it's interesting with the Captain Hook as well, because you hear this a lot with abductees, is that sometimes these entities seem to uh, show you a perception of themselves, which is may make you comfortable, you know. And if you
Right.
if you've got a connection with Captain Hook, they're trying to show you that to comfort you. Do you think that's what was happening, or to?
Oh, definitely. Now, after 2009, I started checking out things and trying to find out things, not by books, but see, I've read about 3 books about alien abductions, and that's it. I stick with my own stuff so that I tell my own story, and it may be wrong, but I think it's right, and it's not really polluted by anyone else's experiences.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and the point I was going to make, I've discovered, well, I'll jump ahead. Now, a lot of things happened in my life that people said God was taking care of me. Then, as time went by, they started going, your guardian angels are taking care of you. And then around the 70s or 80s, it started going, your spirit guides are taking care of you. Because the aliens have saved my life about 10 times, and there could even be more, but I don't know about. And
Wow.
in fact, I'll jump to the past. When I was 2.5, I was sick well, when I was 1, I started being sick. I stopped being able to sit up. I stopped eating as much. I would cry some. I didn't try to talk. And I guess you learn to talk at 1. I don't know. But anyway, they started taking me to a country doctor there in Marble Falls. That's what they call him. And because shoot, 1950 was just a couple of years after World War II. And I mean, we had horses in World War II, you know, and I stopped being able to use the bathroom very easily to urinate in my diaper. And they told the doctor that, and he said, okay. So he had not had the faintest idea of what was wrong with me, but now he had a symptom that was specific enough for him to get me an appointment with a urologist in Austin. And so he set it up, and the next week we went to Austin. And Austin was one of my favorite towns. I'm going to diverge for a moment. My great grandfather brought 250 families to Texas to Marble Falls, although it wasn't Marble Falls at that time.
Wow.
And he bought this land. He had quite a bit of money from his father, who had come over here from Ireland. And he had bought this land, and then he gave it parts of it to these families. And part of that reason was for safety, because it was still in Oklahoma territory, Indian territory at that time. And there was a granite mountain in the middle of it, which everybody thought was a big waste of space and time because they couldn't feed the cows on Granite Mountain. And so he and his two business partners donated that granite to build a capitol in Austin after it burned down. And because of that, they brought a train in. They had to lay track, brought a train to that area, and then Marble Falls became, you know, and they could carry their cows to market up north on a train instead of having to use the cattle trails. And he bought it for the for a mule. He traded he asked the guy how much he wanted for it, and he said, I don't know, how much do you want to pay? And he goes, I'll give you this mule. And he goes,
Wow.
okay, you got it. And the guy thought he was
Wow.
taking advantage. So that was sort of funny. Anyway, and he bred a dog. He and his three brothers, bred a dog to help them herd cows and boars. And the dog is the blue Lacy, and it's part scent hound, part greyhound, and part coyote. And he used European ways of breeding dogs. So it is a specific dog breed, and it's the state dog of Texas now as of 2000.
Wow, man.
Only dog breed originated here. Well,
That's
anyway,
wild.
because yes, I heard all these stories all the time, and we went to the Capitol a lot, and I just loved Austin. So, in a lot of ways, that made it easier to go to the doctor, because after the doctor, I would always insist on going to the Capitol, and we would. And there's even a plaque inside the entryway about my great grandfather and his two partners. And
Wow.
He had an apartment on the second floor in the Capitol for many years, which they gave him.
Man.
So anyway,
So your grandfather played a massive part in history in Austin, like a huge part.
for
Wow,
Texas and
that's so cool, man.
I've always liked him a lot, even though I never met him, of course. But so we went to our first appointment for the doctor, and my mother and father waited downstairs in the big hallway. It was several stories tall building in 52. And um, Dad said when the doctor came down on the elevator from upstairs, he had me in his arms, and he was as white as his coat. Doctors always wore white coats back then. And he talked to them and told them that I had cancer and that they were going to operate on me next week, and that they should seriously consider trying to have another baby because no one had ever lived from a sarcoma before, which is what I had, and that it would lessen the blow when I died.
Oh man. Wow.
And I think that the aliens somehow helped, maybe by guiding them, or there's no telling. I don't think they took me on a ship and worked on me, but I think they helped. And because they can do all kinds of strange things. But of course, I didn't know about them at the time. And my parents didn't know that I knew anything about them because that was 4 years, 3.5 years later. Well, I didn't die. So I fooled them. But
Wow.
we would go to,
And were the chances really like low of surviving that? Like really low.
yeah,
Whoa.
zero. No one had ever survived about it before. I tell doctors about it now, and they don't believe me.
Wow.
And in fact, I had to go to a urologist recently, and she sort of didn't believe me. But then she went up inside of me with a scope to check my bladder, and she did find that my prostate gland gone. And so she knew it was the truth. And in fact, I've had a couple of doctors that insisted on checking. And so I go ahead and let them, even though I don't want them to. Well, they had written about me in a medical journal after the operation. Turns out it was like 6 years after the operation. And I think they were waiting to see if I lived. So, because they didn't want to write about it if I died, probably. So I told her about that. Well, it was 2 weeks later, I went back to visit her, and she said that she had looked me up, and she said, now they didn't say your name, but it was the same town, it was the same operation, everything about it was the same. It was your age, and I'm 99.9% positive it was you. And she said that's a very radical operation to have done, and they didn't have chemotherapy and they didn't have radiation. It was just surgery.
So it's a miracle. It was literally a miracle.
Yeah. So whether the aliens were involved or not, that was the first miracle that happened.
Hmm. Wow, man.
Now, I found for years, I found bruises on my legs, punctures, and one morning I got up and I had a big bruise on my shin, and I didn't get up and walk around. And my wife says, I was married at the time, I was 20, 21 or 22. She said, you hurt yourself in bed more than anyone I've ever heard of. So of course we found out, well, she didn't know. She probably does now, but I haven't talked to her in years. So eventually I'll skip to how I found out because a lot of things happened, like a car accident, uh, different stuff where like, well, the car accident is interesting. I'll go ahead and tell you about that too. It was in 60, either in 61 or 63. It may have been 63. I was riding home from school on my bicycle, and there were kids, a couple in front of me and a couple behind me, and we were going down the road, the side of the road. And I looked over and I saw that this big Pontiac or Dodge was crossing the center line and was heading straight for me. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't even have time to do anything. Well, all of a sudden I was on the ground and I was rolling, and I would see the ground, the tire, the bumper, the headlight, the sky. It did that 3 times, and I couldn't move, which is probably good, or I would have killed myself. But then my body straightened out, and I flew through the air, and I flew between the top and the second row of barbed wire in a fence, and it dipped in and cut my arm about an inch long and not even an inch deep. And that was the only injury. Well, and I sort of had a sprained ankle. That was the only injury. I started to get up, and this policeman that was the crossing guard, he wouldn't let me. He put his hand on my chest and told me to stay still because sometimes injuries don't show up right away. And he had called the ambulance. They picked my mother up. They took me to Kaufman, about 20 minutes away. And then the doctor put me in a room. He wanted to see what I was like the next morning. And he gave me a shot for, forget what it's called, tetanus, a tetanus shot because of getting the wound from the barbed wire fence. Interestingly enough, that barbed wire fence got knocked down the next week. If I had gotten hit the next week, who knows what it would have been like,
Whoa.
because the fence stopped his car, but it didn't hurt it. He was stopped in the ditch, and I flew 12 feet away. Well, Dad said, and I was hit by my school teacher's husband.
Whoa.
Isn't that funny?
That's
So, and
wild.
I made an A, but I think I would have anyway. But so Dad said, well, they bought you a new bicycle. And I said, I don't want a new bicycle. I like my bicycle. Now, in 1961 or 63, whichever this is, bicycles were made out of steel. Like, they were heavy. And if you were very young and it fell over, it was almost like picking up a motorcycle, but not that bad. But they were sturdy and they were hard. They weren't like bikes today. They weren't aluminum. Mine was made in Germany. In fact, I had taken the fenders off to make it a little bit more sporty and a little bit lighter. So anyway, um, he said, well, we've got you a new bike. We'll talk about it tomorrow. So I stayed the night. I was fine the next day, and they let me go at lunch. And we got home, and Dad mentioned my bike again. And once again, I'm telling you, I don't want a new bike. I want my bike. And he goes, all right, well, we'll be home in a minute. He didn't want to argue with me. So we got to the house, and there on the porch was a brand new red and white American Flyer with a pumper, headlight, stoplight, streamers coming out of the handlebars. And the American Flyer was the Cadillac bicycle at that time. It was bigger than all other bicycles as well. A fake gas tank on the frame. So I'm looking at it and I go, this is really cool. I really like this, although I didn't say cool. That wasn't a word then. Um, I said, I really liked it. And he said, okay. And I said, and now I've got two bicycles. And he said, come with me. So he led me around to the side of the house, and there was my bike leaning up against the wall. And if you had looked at it from up above it, straight down, it would have looked like this, only it was better curved, like a crescent moon. And I laid it down on the ground, and the seat was a foot away from the ground. So the frame was about a foot and 4 inches away from the ground.
Man.
And it was ruined, but I'm going, that means that I got hit because it hit the seat and I was on it. Maybe I thought I was on it. And then how did I miss getting hit? How did I miss landing on the ground? How did I miss? Well, I didn't miss rolling, but there's this gap, nothing, missing time, whatever, even though it was instantaneous.
Wow. And there was no serious injury at all.
None. Like my hip should have been broken.
Yeah. I mean, that is deadly, you know?
Other things like that have happened.
Wow. Did anyone
But
see the accident? Did anyone see that happen? Did anyone else see it and tell you like
the
what
kids
could have
all
happened?
saw. No, nobody said anything. It was like they were all stunned. The police officer, he was very calm, and it wasn't like a normal calmness. It was like he was so confused inside that he was stunned because they had seen something, or they all got wiped. Now, I went to a hypnotist in Tyler, and he did a regression about this particular incident. And he said they took me up in the ship. Well, I I saw under hypnosis that I was suddenly in the ship, and I was looking out like they let the wall become transparent, and I was looking out, and we flew out away from the wreck and over the grocery store, which was 2 stories tall, even though it only had one big story inside, to over that, and I saw the top of it, and they turned around and they came back, and then I was rolling on the ground.
So you think that they've intervened at that moment, saved you, and then put you back?
Then years later, about 5 or 10 years later, I worked at that grocery store, and a friend of mine who worked there had to go up on the roof. Well, he wanted me to go with him and the boss thought that was fine because he didn't want one of us up there alone. Well, we got up there, and as I'm going up, I suddenly remember what it looked like. And I remembered that there were two air conditioners. One of them was set in the middle of the room, middle of the roof, and it was working. It was the new one. And the other one was an old, beat up, rusty one that had been obviously where that one was and had been moved over right to the edge of the behind this brick wall. You couldn't see it from the ground because of the height. I remembered seeing that, but I didn't know how I saw it because I didn't remember the aliens or anything. And so that just was another mystery. But I knew it was going to be gravel. And I hadn't been on that many roofs at that point in time.
Wow. Wow, man.
And in 1960, it's either 1961 or 1963, I was in school and I was either 11, I believe it was 1961. So I was 11. And I was taking music class because I wanted to get in band when I got into high school because I didn't want to take PE. I didn't like sports. I didn't want to be in the showers with guys. I didn't want any of that. And they hassle you and all this kind of stuff, the older ones. I didn't want any of that. So so I got involved in music. In all we had at that school was chorus. There was no band, even though we did learn to play the tonette, but I really just learned to play it by ear, and which did every time I was in the band or anything. I played the trumpet part by ear on my clarinet. So I was last chair clarinet because I couldn't pass any reading tests that they would give you. Well, we got to class and our teacher wasn't there. It was this woman, girl, I felt like, and she was in her 20s. I think she was just finishing her college and they had sent her here to teach. And there just happened to be the teacher was sick, so they put her in his place. And she was real pretty. I fell in love with her instantly. And never saw her again. I had never seen her before. And Seagoville was a very small town, so that usually, even though you didn't know somebody, you'd seen them in the grocery store or somewhere else. And she said, "Okay, it's so pretty today," and it was actually hot. We're going to go outside. So she takes us outside and we're by the side of a building where there's a lot of gravel as a driveway to get around the building. And it's such wonderful weather. She goes and stands under a tree, and we're in the sun. She has us line up and put our hands out and touch the ends of our fingers so that we don't bump into each other, and then spread apart a little more. And then she has us start doing side straddle hop. That's what we start with. So we start doing it, and suddenly, over the top of the tree that she's standing under, this ship appears. It's like it's coming, like we didn't see it because it was behind the tree, sort of, and it comes across the top of the tree and it stops there, even with the edge of the tree, or, the plane against the edge of the tree. And we all just stop and we're staring at it. And at that time, I was into model ships. I put together model ships. I didn't get into cars until a little bit later. And it looked exactly like the atomic submarine George Washington. And the fact they call them a George Washington class. And there were more of them with different names. But the first one was the George Washington. And it looked like it had been flipped upside down and the conning tower removed. And then the battle deck of the battleship Missouri, which I had put together, was attached to it. But all the guns were just rooms. They didn't have guns. So there were all these rooms around them. Now, it wasn't exact. And I think I sent you a picture of it next to a water tower
Mhm.
instead of the tree because I couldn't cut and paste it that well at the time. And we just stood there staring at it, all of us, like we were in a trance. And then she goes, "Okay, that's nothing." Now, she never even looked up. She said, "That's nothing. Let's go ahead and get back to work." And we did about three more side straddle hops and the bell rang. So an hour had elapsed, or 50 minutes during us standing there staring at it. And it didn't seem like 50 minutes to me.
Whoa.
Just back into the room. Now, I
Wow.
think she was a hybrid, and she was sent there to get us and take us into the room. I mean, into the ship. We went into the ship. Later, in one of I've had two hypnosis things, and in one of them, we covered that ship, and they got the whole class up there. Some of the little girls were crying. Um, they walked us to someplace and did something in a room, and then brought us back out and brought us back down there. Now, like I said, it's under hypnosis, so I'm not sure that it happened, but it sure seemed like it.
Hmm. Hmm.
And nobody talked about it. Well, I found out later, many years later, in fact, about after I knew I was an abductee, I, I posted this incident on a thing for my high school class. Did anybody know about it? Nobody answered me for a couple of weeks. And then one woman named Iva, she said, I know about it. She said, I wasn't there. In fact, I had pneumonia, which is probably why I remember it all, because when I got back from school, some of the kids started telling me about it. They remembered it too. They were afraid to speak up.
Wow. Man. Can you remember what it looked like on the ship? Can you remember the look of it when you had the regression?
Inside,
Yeah.
it, it was from the hypnosis, it was very sparse, and it did have bulkheads between the sections of the hall, but that could have been my mind changing it into something I knew about. It could be that it was just opening. So I don't know. And and there were some tubes. There were three tubes next to one of the walls, next to one of the doors where we went into another section, and they had water bubbling up in them, but there wasn't anything in them.
Wow.
And
Wow,
that's
man.
basically there, there were desks in the room, and it's like they had TVs in there.
Hmm.
And they showed us some stuff, but I don't remember what.
And you think possibly the teacher at the time was a part of that, and it was sort of a like a setup, basically.
I think she was an alien hybrid made to look like a human. She never
Wow.
saw her again anywhere in Seagoville.
Hmm.
Never.
Yeah, man. When you was going back to when you were six, and when you had that experience as well, was you aware of aliens and UFOs and things like that?
No, I wasn't. And a a key thing happened when this song came on the radio, and I had a radio, so it's either 61 or 63, but you can look on it on the internet for the song. When did the song Does Your Chewing Gum Lose Its Flavor on the Bedpost Overnight? And it came from England. And I loved the song for a while. And then one night I'll go to bed and it starts playing in my head. And I had never had a inner, um, I forget the word for it, so, tells you what all is going on, thinks everything, just a constant dialogue in my head. But from that point on, I did a narrator. So anyway, I go to bed and it starts playing and playing and playing and playing and playing. And at first I'm liking it, and then I'm going, shut up, shut up. I didn't know the F word then, or I would have used it. Shut up. Shut up, and I couldn't go sleep. And finally, it was like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, and Mom came and get me and said, "Okay, it's time for you to eat breakfast and go to school." And I go, "Mom, I can't go to school. I didn't sleep at all." So she had me tell her what happened. And then she didn't say anything. She said, "All right, I'm going to go fix your breakfast, and I'm going to get you a soft drink, and you're going to sit on the sofa or lay on the sofa and watch TV for the rest of the day. You're not to go to sleep, and you're going to go to sleep tonight, and you're going to go to school tomorrow. We don't want you missing school." You go, "Okay." So then I go in the kitchen when she's gotten it ready, and I go, "What was that?" And she said, "I don't know." And that was all she said. So then she puts me on the sofa, and she goes into the dining room, which is connected to the living room by a double opening, no doors, a double opening. And she gets the phone off the wall, and she disappears into the kitchen. I hear her talking to somebody, but I don't know what's going on. And I watch TV all day, which I didn't mind at all,
Yeah.
and drink Coca-Cola all day long, soft drinks. And about 4 o'clock, Dad comes home from work, and this was in Seagoville, and he worked at the prison there. My father was like 6'4", huge, a burr haircut, and looked like Dirty Harry, a lot like him, and very strong. In fact, he'd been a policeman, he'd been a sailor, he'd done all kind, and mostly he wanted to be a cattleman, but that was not available after World War II. The big companies took over all the ranching. So, and they had to get money to take care of my hospital bills. So he had to go to work 2 jobs sometimes, which he made me feel bad about, but that's the way it goes. Then, anyway, he gets home and he doesn't say anything to me. He just walks right by me. And my mother has come out of the kitchen, and he grabs her arm and takes her back into the kitchen, and they have a discussion. And I don't hear much of it. I can hear that they're talking, but I don't know what they're saying, although I tried.
Hmm.
And then he comes out of the kitchen, and he comes and sits down on the sofa right next to me. And it's funny because at this point in time, the cartoons were over with, and there was nothing else on but this doctor show, soap opera about doctors. And I think they were even having someone in a mental institution type of deal, or they were there because of their nerves, which would be an interesting coincidence. But I
Hmm.
don't know if that was correct about that. I do know, though, there were doctors and nurses on there in their white clothes. And he said, "Son, you better straighten up, or I'm going to have to take you to a psychiatrist." And I'm going, I didn't say anything, but I'm inside, I'm going, "What? Because I have a song playing in my head, you're going to take me to a psychiatrist?" Now, in 1961, or even in 1963, you didn't get a divorce. You didn't go to a psychiatrist. I mean, some people were doing that, but not very many, and it was a stigma. It was very much frowned upon by the other people in the neighborhood, and people tried to make you be a certain way. There was peer pressure, even, at that time, that it's probably still here some, but not like that at all. Not like that at all. And so he goes, "You had a relative in the late 1800s or the early 1900s that told people that little people talked to her in her room at night. And they put her in an insane asylum, and that's what they called it. They put her in an insane asylum, and she ended up dying there. And you don't want that to happen to you. You don't want anybody to know anything about you. You don't tell anybody anything about you. I didn't know anything about my parents except what happened when I was with them. I found out later that was a lie. But he said that. He said, "We Lacey's do not talk about ourselves. So you don't talk about this." And he said, "You don't want to be famous." And I'm going, "What?" Because I hadn't gotten that idea yet. It was a few years later that I wanted to be president. And and Jacques Cousteau influenced me as well. So anyway, um, that was pretty much the end of the conversation.
Interesting.
Now in 2009, after I had discovered I was an abductee, I started making a list of everything that had happened because I still wasn't convinced. But the more I looked at everything, I'm going, this didn't happen by God. This wasn't guardian angels. This was aliens. And then I go, and he remembered me talking to them in my bedroom in 1956. And I hadn't snapped to that because I'd only talked to my mother about it. They had never mentioned it to me. He had never mentioned it. And I go, that's why he said that one thing
Hmm.
about the little men coming into her room and talking to her because they had done that to me. So that's how I began to get an inkling of the fact that he was an abductee too. And he did tell me about a couple of later sometimes me and my mom and my sister would be gone, and me and dad would be there alone, and he would start talking. And I was always interested about things that happened during the war. He was a merchant seaman and had a lot of interesting experiences that you didn't even have as a soldier. So he would tell me about things that had happened. He, some people had almost killed him a couple of times, but he had lived. Oh, this one thing though, two different times. He was getting ready to get on a ship to go to England. They were going to go through the Strait of Gibraltar. So they were in the Mediterranean and they had emptied their cargo and everything. And they were all in these lines for these boats, Liberty ships, and they were slow to leave. And this guy come up going to him and goes, "Man, I've really got to get on the ship fast, and I've got to be one of the first out of here." And Dad goes, "Sure." So he goes over and gets on another line at the end and lets that guy have his place that was about the middle. Well, the ships turned out being late anyway, and they both left at the same time. And they're going through the Strait of Gibraltar, and one of the ship that guy's on that he would have been on was way across the way from him, and it hit a mine, and it blew up and killed everybody that was on that ship. And he would have died if he hadn't given that guy his place.
Wow. Wow, man. So there was possibly like you've had help. There was possibly your dad was getting this help as well.
And the same thing happened with an airplane when they were getting ready to go someplace by plane. He gave his place up and without even thinking about the other incident. And then that plane that the man was on crashed and killed everybody. I after I found out I was an abductee, Whitley Strieber had um, a meeting. I can't remember what it's called right now. And my friend that had told me I was an abductee said he thought I should go, and I had already thought I should go too. So that's where I met one of the hypnotists. And I'm getting a blank spot all of a sudden.
That's okay. That's okay, man. It's
Oh,
incredible, man.
I remember now. At the meeting, there was this woman that talks about UFOs a lot on television, on movies. Can't remember her name. She has frizzy hair. Saw her just today. She was there talking to us. Another guy that talks about things like the Egyptians and stuff. And there was the one I was really interested in was a psychic medium named Marla Freeze, and she had been the technical advisor for the television show The Medium back when it was on, which was 10 and 15 years ago. Well, more now, 20 or 30 years ago. And she also helped police, and she may have helped in finding the Green River murderer, but she didn't exactly find him. But she gave them mess information that later they used, and then another psychic helped them as well. And she had helped a lot of police forces. So I wanted to ask her some questions, and I took a picture of my father, a sort of a large picture, and put it in my pocket and took it with me. And we were in these bleachers in a place that looked like they would play basketball in it because it was at a school up in the city where Elvis Presley lived in his last Memphis, I think, or the other one. Anyway, I'm not good at details. We we were in this place that looked like they could play basketball in there, or they had meetings with teachers. So they were in the stacks because it was a college. And I sat down on the very front row, which is something I'd never done. I always sat the very back because I didn't want contact with anyone that could help it. I didn't want to look the teacher in the eye. I didn't want to get questioned about anything because I would know the answers to questions, but the minute they like focused on me, my brain would go, come, everything was gone. So I saved myself embarrassment by not being available. And she asked us if anybody wanted a reading, or she got to the point after she talked, if anybody wanted a reading, she was going to do three. And this girl's hand went up first, and or the same time, but she picked her. And then she she may have picked another woman before me. Then she just walked straight up to me and said, "Okay, you're next." And I gave her the picture of my father, and she said, "Oh, you came prepared." And I said, "Yeah, I know a little bit of stuff." And she said, she didn't look at the picture, and she put it against her thigh with her hand, with the picture facing her thigh. And then she backed up across the floor, and then she fell down. And she told me because I was being a little bit dense, that she was trying to tell me something about my father's death because he wanted me to know that it was really him. And I said, well, he fell, broke his hip, and then he died in the hospital because they operated on him and he wouldn't let them give him the anticoagulant shot when he woke up, probably because he was still under the influence of the anesthetic, and he thought he was in a prison camp and they were going to give him a medicine so he would tell them things. So anyway, then about 8 or 12 hours later, the blood clot in his leg let go and he died. So she knew that. She wanted me to know it.
Wow.
And then she said, "Now, do you have any questions?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to know if he knew about the aliens." And she goes, "I know everything." And I go, "That's my dad," because he was a Taurus and he thought he knew everything. So then she tells me in her own voice that I was a fourth generation abductee. My father, my grandfather, and my great grandfather had been abducted. And one of the things I've found out since then was they did genetic work on each of us, and their work was to bring me here. Each one was modified to a certain extent to bring me here. And even though I did have cancer, but in 2009, that's when I went to that meeting. That's when I started exploring everything. And that's when I saw them for the second time. Because um, me and a friend went for a walk every day for our health along a path that goes through the park next to the creek and into the woods next to the creek and then out. And it's about a mile or two. And I was on my way home and it was wintertime basically, or maybe it was, yeah, it was coolish. And I stopped at a stoplight on the biggest road in Nacogdoches. It's called North Street. Um, and I was in front of Walmart, and suddenly a disc appears at the end of the stoplight, and I'm in the second lane. I'm next to the middle, which is the turn lane, and it looked like it was water. It looked like a disc made of swirling water. It was just like the 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 Stargate from Kurt Russell's movie Stargate, except it had no metal frame around it. And it was floating in the air, and then it became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it got to be about 4 to 8 feet across. And I'm going, what on earth? And I look around and nobody notices it. There were cars on both sides of me going and coming. No one noticed it but me. I closed my eyes and opened them, and it was right there in the same place. I turned my head and I turned back. It didn't move with me. So I knew that it wasn't in my head. It was actually there. And then the light changed and it exploded, though it didn't make any sound. It exploded into the air, but it all disappeared before it ever hit the ground. And a psychic told me that was actually plasma. Well, I told my friend about it, and he listened, but he didn't say anything, which is very unusual. He was a conspiracy theorist at the time when you did it with books, because there was no computer when he started. And he felt that the Nazis were somehow connected with aliens, and actually a lot of what people believe now. So he didn't say anything. I thought that was weird, but okay, whatever. So I go home, and then the next week, the exact same thing happens. I mean, it was like I was taken out of a movie and put right there, and it happened again. I did all the same tests. I left, but I didn't call him when I got home and tell him about it. And the next morning we were going for a walk, and while we were walking, we were at the last tail end of the walk, and I told him it had happened again, and I told him what had happened. He didn't say anything. We get to the house, and I go, I want to know what he thinks. This is so weird. He's not saying anything. And we got into the house, and I said, well, what do you think happened? You haven't said a word about it. What do you think happened? And he said, well, I think I know what happened. And I said, well, what is it? He said, I've been listening to your stories ever since I met you for 6, 7 years now. I go, yeah. He goes, well, I know what's happening to you. And I've thought so for a while, but now I know for sure. And I said, what is it? And he said, do you really want to know? I said, yes, I really want to know. He said, well, after I tell you, I can't take it back. You'll know. And I said, well, yeah, I want to know. And he said, I think that you're abducted by aliens. And I said, you're crazy. And he turns around and he writes down he goes to these pages on the computer and writes the notes down. He folds it and he gives it to me. He said, when you get home, look at these. Well, I went home, threw the paper on the desk next to my computer, and I went and watched TV. And every day he'd bother me about it. Every day, did you watch? Did you look it up? No, 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 no. After about 5 days, I got tired of saying no, and I knew he wasn't going to stop. So I looked him up, and there were three main ones, and they each had like 90 questions. And if you answered like 85 or 90% of these, you're probably an alien abductee and you should contact somebody that knows about these things. Well, I answered yes to every one of them except the ones that were for women.
Wow.
On all three. And then I also, there was this link that just caught my attention that talked about PTSD. And I went and looked at that. And I realized I've been suffering from mild post-traumatic stress disorder for most of my life, too. So then the next day I went and he asked me if I'd seen it. And I said, yes, I have. And then we talked, and he told me about Wesley Strieber's Dreamland Festival and that I should go. And I said, yeah, when you told me about it a little while ago, I decided I should go too. So that's how I got there and found out those things. And then I came home, and every night or every day, I was still trying to deny that this was possible. So, or it may have been right before I went to the festival. I can't remember now. Yes, it was before. I would I would think about it constantly. And I told him I actually thought about killing myself. And he said, won't do any good. He said, they've seen them with dead people. Won't do any good. He said, you can't get away from them. You have to learn to deal with it. He said, you could be welded in a steel box with no opening and they could get in there with you. You know, and actually, they've kept me from killing myself several times. But
Wow.
anyway, uh, so I thought, they must be getting something from me. And I think that this should be reciprocal, even though I didn't realize it had been reciprocal all my life, because they'd saved my life. And so I went, there's next to I've got 2 acres of woods. Well, 3/4 of it is woods, and then 1/4 of it is my house, which is about a normal size of a yard in town. And there's an electric line that runs down through the middle of it. So there's no trees right in that area for about 15, 20 feet on each, all the way with the metal in the middle, the line in the middle. So I walked, I said, okay, I knew they could read my mind, or because of implants that I figured I had, and he told me all about implants. They knew what I was thinking. And I thought, all right, if they know what I'm thinking, maybe they can't turn it off. So I'm going to think this question at them. In fact, I told them I'm going to think this question every day over and over and over again until you give me an answer, because I thought maybe I could just drive them crazy. And so I got under that electric line because it was the easiest place to walk, and I could talk out loud and nobody heard me and nobody would see me what I was doing. And I just walked back and forth. And I worked on the sentence for about 4 hours the first day. And I finally came down with saying, I want to know if you're abducting me. I want to know what you're doing to me. And I want to know if I'm crazy. And I said that over and over again. I said that for 4 or 5 days, 6 hours a day, because I'm very stubborn sometimes. And then At that Friday night, I played at a concert at a country kitchen that I'd been eating at for a while, and I'd been playing country music at home and stuff. So I did a concert there for 20 people, and right after we started, I started forgetting the words because I hadn't been in front of people like that forever, and I'd make them up. So I was singing these songs, and all these people knew these songs. They knew those weren't the right words. And one guy comes up out of the audience, and he goes, I was just taking a quick break, and he goes, "Look, get your words out of your guitar case. Give me your guitar, because I used to play professionally, and I know how to play guitar, and I know all these songs. And you just tell me what you want to do, and I'll play it, and you sing the songs off the paper." So we did that for the second half of the show, which was about 2 hours. And then the very last song was, which is the only rock song I knew that was like countryish, was "Hey Mr. Spaceman" by the Byrds. And he, I told him the chords, and he faked it. He knew how to play it, even though he didn't know the song. But then we loaded up stuff and brought it home, my friend and me. And the guy that played guitar, he later taught me how to play bass guitar and took me to different clubs and let me sing with the band that was playing there. He knew most of them. They were country things. So he set me up singing music and stuff, which was really fun for a while. Well, I got home and I got in bed, and I was wound up. I couldn't sleep. I tried going to sleep and tried. And I mean, it's hard for me to do anyway, but after playing 3 or 4 hours straight, I couldn't. So I put on this tape, I mean, CD. First you use tapes, then CDs came along. And it was by a company named Zygon. And I don't think they're around anymore, but they made these tapes, and some of them had flashing lights and these glasses you would wear, although this particular one was just sound. And it would put you into a deep trance. It would do brain entrainment, would put you into a deep trance. And I figured from the trance, I could either go to sleep or I could just get enough rest that it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't feel dead the next day. Well, I started listening to the CD. I got really relaxed. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't in my bed. I was in a hammock, but the hammock was curved long ways. The sides were attached to the ceiling, not the ends. And I was in there, and it looked sort of like parchment, only it was much thicker, and I could tell it wasn't parchment. And there were some old blankets in there, and I couldn't see very well. Finally, I decided I wanted to get out, and I put my hands up at the edges and pulled myself out and landed on the floor. And it was then when I realized I didn't have any clothes on, which I had not had when I went to bed. And I didn't have my glasses on, so everything looked foggy, which is exactly what happened when I went to bed. So I knew this wasn't a dream, because in my dreams, I've always got my glasses and my clothes on. I knew somehow I had been in this thing, and I'm looking around and I can't tell much. The room is very sterile, except there are two other hammocks, but nobody in them. It didn't appear to be. And there was a door. The way I was standing in the room, there was a door at the edge of one of the where the walls joined. There was a sort of an opening, and I heard either movement or something. I don't think it was talking. And I went, "Holy shit. Damn, I am in a UFO. They're giving me what I wanted. I don't think I'm ready to talk to aliens right now. And then everything just went black. And then it went back. Only I was laying on a metal table in a small room with three grays standing at the edge of the table, and this weird insect looking praying mantis, 6 foot tall, wearing a robe, standing over to the side. And he said, he thinks at me. I can tell he's not saying it. He thinks, don't be upset. Don't be afraid. And instantly I was just calm. Then I was in my bed, but I was looking at me in the room on the table. And the picture closed in. Oh, and the picture turned to black and white. Now, my friend Daryl Sims, because I had already found him and started talking to him about it, and he said, yeah, you're an abductee. Well, no, I've told him afterwards. I hadn't met him yet. He said they can make you perceive something however they want to. He said you were on the ship. They were letting you think you were in bed for comfort, for yourself, for your calmness. And anyway, I'm looking at it and it turns black and white. I mean, well, grayscale, like black and white television. And then the edges black, like around this, start moving in. And it was me, my body on this table from my neck down to just past my knees. And then it just went, it didn't make any noise, but it just switched and it was X-ray. And I could see my heart beating, my stomach, my skeleton, everything. And unfortunately, those black lines, the black area when they closed in, they hid the grays and they hid the mantis. So I didn't get to see them in X-ray, or I would have known what was inside of them.
Wow.
Then they did the anal probe. They didn't do it very long and it didn't hurt. And then all of a sudden, I was in my bed and I was wide awake. However, I turned over and I went to sleep with no problem. The next morning I woke up and I got a piece of paper and I drew the mantis. Now I didn't know that's what he was called. I'd never seen him before. I never heard of him. I didn't know he existed. I thought desperately that this was my one proof that this was a dream. So I drew him and folded up the piece of paper and set it down. And then I started crying. And I cried and I didn't know why. I cried for about 30 minutes and I thought maybe it's something subconscious that's coming out. I don't know. Maybe they triggered something. Uh, because I honestly wasn't upset, but I couldn't stop crying and then it shut off. And then it turned back on for just a minute and then it was gone. Later that day, I went over to my friend's house and I told him, and I call him Frank in my book. I told him what had happened. And I said, but I've got this. And I got out the picture and I said, this proves it was all just a dream. And I laid it down on the table and he was looking at it. And he turns around and he taps on his computer. And then he said, look at this. And there was a picture that a child had drawn that looked exactly like my picture. And he said, that's the mantis creature.
Wow.
So I go, oh, that sort of did away with my thinking that it was a dream. So they had shown me what they were doing to me.
Wow. So you got the answers that you wanted. Wow, man.
More than I actually expected to get.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So do you think it's possible that that mantis entity that you saw that night was the same as the Captain Hook entity? Do you think that was possibly the same person? Entity,
Yes.
sorry.
Now, at one point before I knew I was an abductee, the same year, three strange things occurred. In one of them, I was in my bed, I'd been meditating, and I saw with my eyes closed these two beings that were wearing suits that looked a lot like the suits for the spaceman in 2001, the space suits for 2001, but it wasn't 2001. And it was in the 80s. And one of them had this notebook. I mean, he at first I thought he had a notebook, and then I thought it was a clip pad. And then I realized it was like a miniature television screen this big and thin, and he was doing things on it. So they had, I don't remember what we call them now, notepads. They had little computers like that, and they were using it. And one of them looks at me and he goes, "We're just checking your energy." And also, before he said anything to me, I opened my eyes and they were gone. I closed my eyes and they were back. I opened my eyes and they were gone. I closed my eyes and they were back. And he
Wow.
did that. So then they were gone, even with my eyes closed. Then another thing that happened, I was in bed meditating and I had a pillow under my head and a pillow on top of my head. And suddenly these hands grabbed me by the ankles and pulled me down out from under the pillow. And I laid there with my eyes closed and the hands let go. And I laid there and I'm going, "You got to look." And I go, "I don't want to look. I don't know what's there. I don't know if somebody's broken into my house," which is what I thought had happened. So I looked and there was nobody there.
Wow.
But the third thing that happened that year, I was really miserable and I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I hated my job. It was like I worked at the welfare department. It was like I interviewed people. It was like interviewing people on a conveyor belt. It wasn't a conveyor belt, but it was like that, one after the other, after the other, after the other, day after day after day. And um, but I didn't want to kill myself because I thought that would be bad, maybe. But I wanted to die. So I invented this thought that there had to be a door in the back of our heads where we can get out and maybe come back. So I had that thought and I thought of it as being a necronaut. And I would get into as I mean, I would meditate for like 2 or 3 hours, trying to get in as relaxed a state as I possibly could. And then one day I was doing it, and I think this is the first time that no, it had happened once or twice before. Doesn't matter. All of a sudden, I couldn't feel that I was breathing. I couldn't feel my body. I couldn't feel my heart beating. I couldn't feel the bed. I couldn't feel my body. I couldn't feel anything. I was in total blackness. And all of a sudden, this wall of light sprung up beside me. And I'm going, wow. And I really did say that at that point. Um, and I thought, I could move into that wall if I wanted to. And I go, but I might not be able to get out, or I might be having a heart attack, and I'm 20 minutes from town. By the time I got to the telephone and called, I might have been dead. And the one thing this experience showed me for sure was that I actually did not want to die.
Hmm.
So I said, I'm not going to go. And this voice goes, huh, you've been asking for this, and I went to the trouble of getting it for you, and now you're not going to go. And it laughs 3 times. And the first time it laughs, the wall shrank into a disc. And the second time it turned into a sphere of light. And the third time it was gone. And I was wide awake. And
Wow.
that voice, I had heard that voice before.
Wow.
That was the mantis that had said, don't be upset. I heard him several different times. In fact, we ended up having some conversations a few times, though they were very short. And anytime I'd get anywhere close to getting any information, he was gone. And he felt smarter than any, more intellectual, more intelligent than anything or anybody I'd ever been around. And I've heard recently that they are.
Mhm. Man, do you still have interactions with the mantis now?
I really don't know. Sometimes they tell me things. There was a point after I found out that for a couple of months we actually I talked with somebody and then they disappeared, and I had a feeling that someone up above them didn't like him talking to me. But that could be my imagination. It could be that he had to go. And like I was in and it was always, it was either saving my life or it was about pointless stuff. I I was in Hastings Video when it was here, and I was going to get this movie to watch, and I really liked the cover, although I had avoided it because it was about a guy being buried in a coffin underneath a tent in the Middle East. He was a truck driver, and the whole movie takes place in that coffin, and I'm claustrophobic. So I go, but the cover, I mean, they were so smart. The cover was fantastic. And I went, wow, I'm going to get it this time. And the voice, I reached for it, and that same voice that goes, don't get it. And I said, now, and I'm talking to him out loud, although he's answering me in my head. And there were some people that were noticing. I said, well, I really like the cover and I want to watch it. I think I can watch it. And he goes, you won't be able to. And I said, well, look, I really appreciate you looking out for me. And I don't want you to stop, but I'm going to try and watch it. So I got it. And that's when I noticed that there were people looking at me. I got it and I left. And I brought it home. I ate dinner. And I put it in the VCR because it was still a tape at that time. It wasn't a CD. Put it in the VCR, and I turned it on, and it's just total black. And then you hear this lighter go, and then, and there you are. The vision is you can sort of see him, but you're laying on your back in this box, looking at the box, and I just freaked out, and I couldn't watch the movie.
Wow, man. So it's like this entity. He know obviously he knows you. Like he knows what you can handle, what you don't like, and that's wild. It's like a part of
You
you.
know, he knows what's going to happen. He's they saved me. They I had another incident that was similar to the car accident, but it was when I was singing in a bar with this guy who's a one-man band. He plays keyboard, guitar, and sings, and I was singing for him. And I got through with my three songs, and I decided that it would look real cool if I jumped off the front of the stage. And there were over 100 people in that bar, and I walked towards. It was only like a foot, but it was stage, foot drop, concrete, and I got to the edge and I was taking the step that would carry me into the air, and I realized that my other foot was caught under a band of speaker cables that were locked down to the floor, and I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to go bam, and I thought, I'm going to die. Well, all of a sudden, now I was still moving, but I was not in control of my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't bat my eyes. And the foot that was under the cables pushed me up into the air, and the cables dropped off the toe of my boot. And at the same time, it spun me around backwards, which point I was in the air and I sat straight down like you set a salt shaker on the table.
Wow.
And the audience was the silence. It was like a wave of silence that went from the stage, and everybody was looking at me and quiet. And the singer goes, "We rehearsed that, ladies and gentlemen." And then they went back to drinking and they were happy. But
Wow.
I tried it when I got home. And every time I'd land, I had to take two or three steps backwards to get from falling over. There's no way I could just set myself down. And I was as I was leaving there, I went, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I knew it
Wow.
was
Yeah. Wow,
they
man.
knew that would happen ahead of time.
It's incredible, man. So, a difficult question. What do you think? Why do you think they are protecting you? What do you think is their reason for picking like your bloodline? What do you think? What do you think it is?
Actually, for a couple of years, I used this psychic that lives in London, and I would send her questions on an email, and she would do a reading and send me back an MP3. And I did it 2 years in a row, and everything she told me came true. I got her name out of a book by a writer that writes about conspiracy things. I can't remember his name right now. And so the third year, she sent me the tape. And during the middle of the tape, she said, "Huh, you may think that I'm silly, but you're one of them." As, and of course, I couldn't say anything to her. She wasn't there. So the year progressed, and everything she had said started happening and happening and happening. And it was right at the end of the year, and I'd run out of things on the tape. They had all come true, except, of course, nothing had happened telling me I was an alien. But by then I'm going, maybe that's true too. So I decided to meditate on it. I got myself into a deep trance, and I thought, I've never felt like I was part of my family. I've never felt like I was part of society. I don't like the rules of the way we're made to live. None of it. It's like I was left on my parents' doorstep as an orphan when I was a baby, and I just don't fit in. Well, I went through that, just kept thinking about things, and I got suddenly where I felt it emotionally and I felt it intellectually. And at that point, everything disappeared. No heartbeat, no breathing, no nothing, no bed, no body. except I could feel the back of my neck, and it was like two fingers went into the back of my neck and grabbed me, the real me, and pulled me out. And I was in this immense, infinite darkness. But there was a grid. First, there was a grid of light that appeared in front of me, and it seemed to go on forever in all four directions, but it gave me a focal point. And then a voice, not that mantis, he wasn't involved in this. A voice said, the Council of Three. And I knew that I was being introduced to the Council of Three, whatever they happened to be. Then three guys that looked, they were made out of light. They weren't made out of tubes of glass that had light in them. They were made out of light. They looked like they had robes on. They looked like they would have been 8 or 9 feet tall standing up, maybe even more. And I was this little spear. I could actually see 360 degrees around me. And I can't even imagine that. I mean, I can't imagine seeing what's going on behind me, in front of me, and all sides and up and down, all at once. And they were on these huge seats. They were like thrones. They were made out of light also, but they had human features all projected in the light or whatever. And the one in the middle goes, "We've been waiting for you to figure this out." Or he said, "We've been waiting for you to realize this." It was one of those two things. And then he said, "We're very, very proud of you." And then, have you ever used a dial-up connection for a computer?
Yeah, yeah. My
They
AOL back in the
scream,
day.
they scream and squeal and all of that. Well, all of a sudden, it was like that going into me, the sphere. I would say my head, but I was the sphere. And images of things were coming at me. In fact, I was having a download and I didn't even know what a download was, but I read the description of one and I went, oh shit, that's what I experienced. And just tons of stuff flowing at me. In fact, I couldn't even like there was so much I couldn't grab hold of any one thing except I did. And right at the end, as it ended, I had this thought that the interest on your loans are the chains of your slavery. And I knew I was supposed to get out of debt. So every penny that I didn't have to live or buy gasoline to get to work went into paying off my credit cards. And there were quite a bit at that time. And since then, a lot of these things that were downloaded into me, I mean, it was like an encyclopedia or 3 to 6 movies crammed in my head. And I've always heard we pick our parents. A lot of people, since I've been into metaphysics and stuff like that, that we pick our parents. Well, for me, that's only partly true. Um, like she did, I did another reading with her and she told me a few things about me. She said I had only been to Earth twice. Um, I had been to Atlantis and I had been to, come on, word. The word is trying to get away from me. The Lemuria. And she said, and things on Earth were a lot different. And I don't like them. I don't like them. I don't like what's going on now. I liked them then. She said even at sometimes the animals were friendly to each other. You know, they were vegetarians just like us, all of them. And um, and we knew they were intelligent, just different things like that. And we could read minds. And then I'm thinking about my childhood and I'm going, that's why I hated eating. I hated to have to eat, and not because of Lemuria, but because of living on a different, see, I didn't really live on a different planet. People would keep going, what planet were you on? And I don't know. Nobody ever told me the name. I don't know if I was even on a planet.
Mhm.
I um I was in a realm, in the angelic realm, where we're not physical. We are consciousness. And a lot of us are, most of the time, we're spheres. We could be whatever we want to be, but what's the point? They were doing it for me. That's why they were being that. Normally, they would just be light. But that made sense. Like when I was a teenager and read that some people were experimenting with just eating, actually it was protein drinks, but they didn't call it that, mixes of chemicals. And I'm going, yeah, that's what I want. I don't want to have to eat. I didn't even like drinking or breathing all that much, but can't get away from it. Uh, so it made a lot, things in my life started making more sense. And when I came here, when I came to Nacogdoches in 71, I was at a point where I had read some about karma, but not much. Actually, it was after, but I realized that I didn't have any karma. If somebody would do something to me, ooh, as an example, we sold our trailer house. We'd been married 2 years and we sold our trailer house that we had bought, and we sold it to him for cost. But then he wanted me to tear out a wall, make the living room and bedroom a big living room, put in carpet, do all this shit. Sorry,
That's
for
okay, man.
free. Okay, good. I don't know what you can say on YouTube or not, but anyway, for free. And I said, man, I don't want to do all that stuff. And he said, okay, I haven't paid you for the trailer yet. And he'd already got me well, this was after he'd already gotten me to rip out the wall. And we almost had a fight, but he was a big, huge, he'd been a football player. I wasn't going to fight him. That would have been foolish. I'm against being hurt. And so I thought, okay, well, at least we're getting what we put into it, even though I'm doing a little extra work, like a week's more. Sold him the trailer because we had already started moving our stuff into we'd already moved into the other house. We'd rented it. And he bought the trailer, gave me the money, and we all left. And then about a year later, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I told him who I had sent the trailer, who I'd sold the trailer to. And he said, oh, I know him. And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, do you know what happened? I said, what do you mean? He said, he was taking the trailer and he was going to be going across Houston. And it's just as he was coming into Houston, you know, where there's getting to be traffic is getting smaller. I mean, the road still lots more traffic and everything. I said, yeah, a burst of wind came across and ripped the roof off of that trailer and collapsed all of the walls.
Whoa. Oh,
Things would happen like that to people that did me wrong.
yeah. Yeah. Karma's a bitch, man.
I
Wow.
always felt sorry for him, but
Yeah.
really I didn't.
No, well, no. Yeah, wow. Man, incredible. Incredible.
I probably built up some karma since then, but not much. but I'm supposed to still be able to go back to the angelic realm.
Mhm. So, do you think that these entities, these UFOs that people see in the sky today, and it's a big talking point at the moment, do you think that what do you think those entities are? Are they connected to what you've experienced? Do you think they're all a part of the same
Or
thing?
I think now it's a mix of the aliens, like the Greys would work for the light beings. They'd work with the mantis and for the mantis. They're like soldiers in a way, except they're not doing the war. But like my experiences have always been pleasant that I've known. Well, I don't remember a lot, but I don't come back with a great deal of fear or anything. In fact, they saved my life. They talked to me. They kept me from being in car wrecks, all kinds of things. Um, I think that my labs in the military and skunk works, that some of those things we see now and are human. And I think the ones that do bad things to people are humans.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
I mentioned that in one of the support groups I'm in today on the Facebook, and this woman said she agreed with me completely, and she knew that the ones that had hurt her were not alien. And every time somebody started complaining about him, or hurting him, or being mean, she knew that if they weren't just afraid, that they were with humans.
Mhm.
Sometimes a person will get afraid because it is strange, and then it will seem like a horrible experience. But once, like, as I was working on my list and as I had talked to them and seen them in the after the cafe, I'm looking at this and I go, one thing was uh, blaringly clear to me. If they weren't in my life, I would be dead
Mhm.
several times over.
So these have had a positive impact on your life. Interesting, man.
Now, I believe I was supposed to be a walk-in, and I was supposed to walk into this body right after the surgery. In fact, I probably would have awakened in the body. But the person that had that body before me, he was only wanted it for a couple of years. He just wanted to he'd never been born before. He just wanted a small taste, and then he wanted out, and they were going to switch us. So they had arranged it for me, and then he backed out. He didn't think he could handle it. He knew what my father was going to be like, and he was going to be good for the first 2.5 years, which he was. But then just things got bad, and he became distant. You can abuse someone just by being distant, and so they talked me into going ahead and being born in the body. It's just 2.5 more years. What's the difference does it make? Even though, no, you won't be really psychic. See, if I had walked in, I would have had everything I knew how to do. Like I would be able to read minds. I, I might be able to materialize things. I probably would have been virtuoso in music and all these kinds of things. But I've gotten a lot of stuff that I can do now. Like I play synthesizers and I don't know how to play keyboard. I know where middle C is, and that's my only knowledge about that. And then Jimmy did tell me about these three notes. I can't remember their note. In music theory, they talk about notes as numbers, like the one, the five, and stuff like that. And I know these three notes that if you get playing this long string and you're suddenly strung out and you don't know where to go next, you can go to the fifth of that note. You can just count down five and hit that note, and then one more, and you're going to be right where you want to be. It may not be where you expect it, but it will fit
Hmm.
sound wise. So I learned that when I was learning how to play the bass, but I still am not a very good bass player. I, with country music, it's like the same patterns for, I knew which ones to start on for G, which ones to start off for C. So that was easy. But, and I forgot where I was going with this. I hope I made a point.
Yeah, no, it's cool, man. No, it's cool. It's so interesting, man. Do you think
And
with oh sorry, you go.
well, when I started at art school, I was going to be a writer, and I was going to get a teaching degree and teach art, English until my first book sold. Well, I'd have died if I'd waited. But anyway, I met this guy my senior year of college, and he was an artist, and he showed me his art, and it was prints done on paper, and I was so amazed because they looked like they were in a magazine, and of course that would not please him, but that's what sold me on it. I wanted to do prints, so I changed. I got my degree in English, and then I switched over and started on a master's degree in art. And during the summer, I had to take like 4 courses to be able to get into the school and into the master's program for art. So I have a bachelor's in English, a master's, and an MFA in art.
Wow.
And I, I probably would have known more and been better if I had listened to anybody. My creative writing teacher, who I thought was my friend, he wrote a letter for me to get a teaching job, and I couldn't get one. A few years later, they opened up the letters at the school and let us read them. And they said, well, I taught him creative writing, and he was very talented, but he wouldn't take direction, and he wouldn't take anything that I told him, and he's very rebellious, and but he has a natural talent, so I had to give him an A. So anyway, high school teachers didn't want to hire me for some
Yeah,
reason.
that's wild, man. Man. Going back to when you was at school and you had that experience where you saw the UFO and the other kids in the class also saw it and you were taken on board the ship. Do you think it's possible that some of those kids in your class were going through the same stuff that you was going through growing up
I mean, have to be. I don't think they would come take me and then just coincidentally take
Mhm.
everybody else and give them first experience and let a bunch of them remember it just like I remembered it. So yes, they were probably abductees as well.
Mhm. Interesting. I mean, the more I do this podcast and talk to cool people like yourself, the more I think that this sort of thing, abductees, it's a much more common thing than we're led to believe. There seems to be a lot more people that experience this, and it's a lot more normal than they'd like you to think it is.
I had a girlfriend that I thought she had never been an abductee, and I was going to rub her back, and she turns over, and she had all these punctures, like 3, 4 triangle, the kinds I've shown you, all over her back. And I told her, and she flipped out. She told me I shouldn't tell her things like that. And she was an alcoholic too. But anyway, a couple of years later, after we quit dating, she called me and she said, she was living in New Mexico and she rode her bike this trail out in the desert all the time, same trail, same trail. She said, one day, not long ago, I was riding it and then I was on the next hill and I don't know how I got there. So
Wow.
you were right. Yeah, no, I was right.
Wow, man. Interesting stuff. Byron, super interesting, man. You blow my mind tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, man. Your experiences. It really is incredible. Do you feel like kind of lucky now that we're in a time where we can talk about this sort of stuff? Whether this, you know, UFOs, it's big talking point in mainstream media now. Most people, I would say, know that there's more going on now. Even your skeptical people that before would be like, no, there's definitely nothing. There's nothing else out there. I think most people are pretty, there is something more going on. That is for sure. I think most people would agree with that. So it must have been difficult for like your dad in those times where you can't talk about this stuff at all. And it's quite a new thing that we can talk about this now, that we've got these platforms where we can discuss this openly and not be judged. And that's cool, man.
It, I think it's definitely time. They're ready for it to happen. The aliens are ready for it to happen.
Hmm.
See, they've got free energy. They can end our slavery. I mean, think about that. You got a little box or something, I don't know what it would be, and you set it down in your backyard, and then you've got all the electricity or all the power that you want. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, you'll have to go buy food, but who knows? You might even be able to fix your own food, but that'll take away like three-fourths of um, our expense. Our car will be free. Everything, so much will be free with free energy. But then the people that are trying to hold on to it, that are making their money from us, the ones that we're their slaves, they've been milking money from us all our lives and from our fathers and from their fathers. And that's going to end. No matter how much they try to fight it, it has to end.
Hmm. I'm ready for that. That's for sure. Yes, sir. Byron, man, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you tonight, brother. I know you've got books out where you've documented all your experiences. Would you be able to tell the listeners where they can find you and your books?
This is Chosen, Chronicles of an Alien Abductee. It looks backwards, I can't tell.
No, that's cool, man.
You can look up my name, Byron Lacy, on the internet, and you'll find tons of stuff. Or you can go to Amazon and look up my name, and you'll find my music, and you'll find my books. You don't need a specific web page. There's the stuff's there now, and you can go to Spotify and find me. My music is experimental electronic music, and one guy that interviewed me about my music, and we talked about aliens a lot too the other day or a month ago. And he said it's like controlled chaos. And I thought, I really like that term.
That sounds good. Yeah.
So that's my music. I can make order out of chaos. And it's a gift that I was born with. I could do that in art. And he said he can see in a way like my songs are like paintings, and each different sound is a different color of paint, and it's all put together and it's all in ordered and structured, and it sounds right. I've actually edited songs, recorded everything, and when I'm going to record, I don't know what I'm going to do. I record the drums, and then I just play each instrument from start to finish, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe six, and then I get it all lined up there, and I start cutting things out and moving things around, and I make a song. And if it doesn't sound right, I throw it away or flip it backwards, and so I make it orderly. I can make things orderly.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, I'm going to be listening, and I'm also going to be sharing all your links in the show description so people can find you and your work. Byron, it's been an
Thank you.
absolute honor talking to you tonight, man. Thank you so much. It's not easy talking about this stuff, and you shared it so well, and I really appreciate that, man. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
You're
You're helping with disclosure too.
well, thank you very much, man. Thank you. You're welcome back anytime. You ever want to come back on and tell us more? You're more than welcome.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you.
It's good to know you. Think of you as a friend. And I guess I will leave now.
I am
Bye.
37.
I'm 74.
You're looking good, sir.
Uh, maybe take care.
You're looking good, brother. Thank you very much, man. As I say, super interesting stuff, and I'm excited to talk to you more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys, oh, he's gone. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the show today. If you did, share it where you can. That is a great way to support us, and we'll be back very soon for more freaky conversations. In the meantime, stay safe and keep it freaky. Bye for now.